I grew up in a family where Sunday wasn't a performance, it was a habit that kept the roof on. My mother's calendar wasn't on a wall, it lived behind her eyes. If a neighbor was moving, we showed up with tape. If Mrs. Reyes's transmission died, my dad lined up rides. None of it was a sermon. It was folding chairs without being asked, carrying boxes without being told, and leaving a kitchen cleaner than how you found it. That's the operating system I inherited. I became an accountant not because I love numbers more than people, but because I sleep better when things add up. If they don't, I look for why, not to punish, but to set the table straight so glasses don't slide. Portland fit me. The drizzle, the bikes that show up on time like polite ghosts, the way coffee here arrives like it has a right to. I met Tessa at a trivia night in a pub that smelled like wet wool and hops. She worked as an office manager at a chiropractic clinic that marketed itself as the place you go when your spine isn't sure it believes in itself. Tessa had a way of balancing 5 conversations without losing any of them. She handled payroll, supply orders, and a medical printer that broke whenever the moon had opinions. She could text while making a spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet would be right. We were drawn to each other for ordinary reasons. She liked that I didn't flinch when the dishwasher leaked. I liked that she could walk into a mess and divide it into lists. By the time our son, Logan, was in 6th grade, I had a beard that made me look more patient than I am, and Tessa had Instagram figured out in a way I never did. She liked posting quotes on beige backgrounds that sounded like breathing exercises. She liked captions that folded a moral into a photo of tea. I didn't mind. She never posted Logan's face, which I appreciated. The internet doesn't deserve your child's cheeks. We did our own version of a family tradition test, though in our house it was light. No clipboards. Sundays at the Mutual Aid Center in Lintz were our ritual. We'd bag rice and beans, refill the produce table, cut cardboard down for the recycling truck. There's a rhythm to rooms like that. You show up, you keep moving, you leave your commentary at the door unless it's funny and kind. When Logan was little, he'd sit on an upside-down milk crate and draw trucks on scrap paper. As he grew, he graduated to the pallet jack, a badge of honor none of us had to polish for Instagram. Last year, around when Logan turned 16 and started wearing headphones like a moat, Tessa's posts shifted. The quote started using words like somatic and nervous system regulation. The beige backgrounds turned the color of expensive oatmeal. She started seeing a somatics coach named River. He wasn't part of her clinic. He rented a room in a shared wellness space on Belmont with plants that looked like they had health insurance. She said he helped her untangle patterns she'd been living in since 19. I believed her. If you've ever been married a while, you know a person can love you and still need a tool you don't know how to use. River asked for cash. Tessa said it was to avoid the energy of banks. She said their fees were a trauma. She said cash keeps you honest. She laughed when she said it, so I laughed back and made a mental note of the part of me that doesn't like poetry used as a drop cloth. I invited her to the Mutual Aid Center on a Sunday. We were short on hands. Mrs. Nunez had thrown out her back, and the new guy didn't know you never stack bananas under canned goods. Tessa said she was writing that weekend about the hidden gatekeeping in community rituals and didn't want to muddy her head with other people's needs. She said it gently. She said she'd come next time. Her next post was a carousel about how unpaid labor keeps women complicit in their own exhaustion. She wrote it well. People shared it. I recognize myself in the second slide as a sweet, dull man who thinks a pot of chili is a revolution. It was easy to be hurt. It was hard not to feel seen by something I didn't like. I decided not to drag Tessa to the pantry out of pride. We have different fuel. She uses words to light rooms. I use lists to make sure the rooms don't fold in on themselves. I thought the tension would pass like weather. What came instead were late sessions. She called them that. I have a session after work, sometimes just session. The word is tender until you see the bill. She started coming home smelling like the inside of a bar that pretends to be a forest. The receipts were from places that use sleigh coasters and menus with no serif in sight, stamped with times like 10,042 p.m. and 11,018. I'm not a jealous man by default. Jealousy is lazy math. You decide on an answer and force the numbers to make it. I prefer equations that solve themselves. But receipts are timestamps, and timestamps make lines whether you like it or not. Logan noticed first. He didn't say so. He poured a bowl of cereal at 10 in the evening, took his spoon to his room like it would protect him. On Tuesday, I knocked and asked if he wanted to go to the driving range Saturday. He shrugged. The shrug. Teenagers are born knowing, and said, maybe. He looked tired. He smelled like gym floor and teenage boy, a scent not even candles can conquer. That Saturday, Tessa texted that she had a double session. She said she'd be late. I didn't scroll through her phone. I didn't follow her car. I cut vegetables. I simmered sauce. I listened to the house not saying things. Logan came into the kitchen and retied his hair in a knot like he was trying to keep his thoughts from falling out. He pointed his chin at the pot. "Smells good," he said. I asked if he wanted to watch the game. He said he had homework and then stayed in the living room anyway with the volume down because we are a family that pretends steady so no one has to name the storm. That was the week the post got teeth. The caption started talking about men who weaponized tradition to control women's bodies. The quotes in beige started saying things like, "Rituals are fences built by cowards with time on their hands." She wrote a long paragraph about apron politics that made my mother's hands sound like a machine. It gathered likes. It gathered amen from people who live in phones. Meanwhile, the pantry needed someone to break down boxes. I brought it up in the kitchen with the stove off, because important conversations when fire is on feel like you're asking the pot to join in. I said, "It hurt to see our Sundays on the internet as a villain." Tessa said, "I didn't name you." I said, "I recognize the shape of our kitchen." She said, "I am allowed to speak about systems." I said, "I'm asking you to not call my mother's generosity a compliance ritual." She said, "Your mother's been labeled for other people as a monument to unpaid labor." I said, "It's a way we don't make poverty a content strategy." She said, "You worship punctuality." I said, "I worship showing up." We didn't solve anything. Sometimes you don't. It's not a failure. It's an acknowledgement there isn't enough honesty in the room to finish the job without breaking glass. Then the checkouts started landing on my desk like they belonged to a story I hadn't signed up to read. They weren't huge, but they were regular, after-work spots that stayed open later than the Wellness Collective did. River's office is 3 blocks from a bar with a forest mural and a whiskey list longer than its dessert menu. The timestamps lined up with River's session hours. I didn't make a spreadsheet. I didn't print them out and tack them on a corkboard. I kept them in my head because heads don't get subpoenaed. The moment I knew my job had changed came on a Wednesday. Logan had an early release, and Tessa texted that she'd be home late. I was in the car on my way to pick up dry cleaning when Logan called from a number I didn't recognize. He sounded like he had swallowed a screwdriver and it was sticking out between his ribs. He asked if I could come to the corner by the coffee shop on Belmont. I asked if he was hurt. He said no. He said he didn't want to be seen walking home with me because he didn't want to be seen. Walking home with me because he didn't want to be seen. I turned the car around. I found him on a bench pretending to scroll. He shot me a look I hadn't seen since he was 6 and hid a broken lamp behind his back. He said, "I saw Mom." I said, "Okay." He said it twice more, the whole sentence bloated from holding breath. "I saw Mom with the coach." He didn't say River. He didn't have to. He described a touch that doesn't belong to coaching. He described a hand that knows a back without being told. He described laughter that belongs indoors, not on a sidewalk where your son could hear it. He described a kiss at a crosswalk. He described how he turned around because running would have meant he cared, and he didn't want to give that away. He described how he waited until they went into the bar and then called me from a stranger's phone because his battery had died and he couldn't stand the building that held our table. I didn't ask if he was sure. I didn't say, it could have been someone who hugged too long. I didn't force the adult urge to press details into a tidy block so I could carry it easier. I said, "Thank you for calling me." I said, "We are going to Uncle Nate's." I said, "You don't have to tell this story to anyone else if you don't want to." He said, "I don't want to talk about it." I said, "Then we won't." He said, "Can we get pizza?" I said, "Yes, because that is the single true answer parents have when the ground moves under a kid's feet. Feed them, then get them somewhere with a door." Tessa called while we were in the car. I let it go to voicemail because I didn't trust my words not to come out shaped like glass. I texted Nate and asked if he had a couch and 2 blankets. He said the couch, blankets, and extra toothpaste. We pulled into his driveway on a street lined with maples that looked like they're solving something slowly. He hugged Logan without touching his head. He hugged me like we were both carrying a box. He put out plates and the paper towels we use when the day doesn't deserve real napkins, and he didn't ask until the second slice. Then he asked if the police were necessary. I said no. He asked if I was going to yell. I said no. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. He asked what I needed from him. I said a spare bedroom and a little silence. I slept on the floor that night. The couch would have been more comfortable, but the floor made me feel like a person who can handle weight. Tessa left 3 voicemails, In the first, she sounded annoyed. In the second, she sounded like a woman who realizes she's not the only one in the room with a story. In the third, she sounded like a child who cannot find the light switch in a house that used to know her well. I called our family therapist in the morning because I believe in handing off problems to people who study them. We had started seeing her 2 years before when Logan decided that algebra was proof of a cruel world. She is one of those women who can say the word boundary without sounding like a fence. I told her what Logan had said. I asked for a recommendation about immediate steps. She said 3 things. Move Logan to a neutral space until we understand how he's metabolizing this. Do not make him recount it. Do create a plan for talking about it so he doesn't have to be the person who manages your grown-up feelings. And document, not for punishment, for clarity. Clarity is a language I speak well. I made a list so the future would not be translated by adrenaline. Location of the incident. Time. Who saw what? What was said? I did not add adjectives. I called my boss and said I needed 2 days. He said, take the week. He is a man I will never leave for a job that pays more because there are bosses who love you more than raises do. Tessa texted asking if Logan was with me. I wrote, yes. She wrote, can I talk to him? I wrote, no, not yet. She wrote, you can't keep me from my son. I wrote, I'm keeping him from your narrative until he can sleep. She wrote, that's cruel. I wrote, it's a boundary. She stopped texting for 3 hours. In that time, I found a short-term sublet 3 blocks from Nate's for me and Logan because I knew my future self would thank me for choosing an address that didn't have ghosts. When Tessa finally called, I let it ring twice so my voice wouldn't sound like I'd been waiting. She said, he misunderstood. I said, you kissed your coach in public. She said, it's complicated. I said, complications are not the same as privacy. She said, I needed to feel alive. I said, you needed cash receipts and the word somatic to cover your alibi. She said, you are weaponizing paperwork because you don't understand the hunger women swallow. I said, I understand hunger. I am feeding our son. She called me sanctimonious. I called her by her name and told her I would be filing for temporary custody because our son shouldn't have to share a kitchen with whatever story she plans to tell about love and liberation. She called me a coward. I told her I was a father. Mediation is a quiet room where people who don't like each other agree to write. I hired a mediator because court is a megaphone, and I didn't want Logan's life to be remodeled in public. The mediator was a man who had a therapist's nod and a clerk's pen. He asked us to write down our non-negotiables. Tessa wrote that Logan should never be kept from his mother. I wrote that Logan's schedule and sleep come before our impulses, and that nobody he doesn't know gets introduced as a friend without a month's notice and a conversation with our therapist. Tessa rolled her eyes at the word therapist like it was a sweater. The mediator nodded like the word was the right size tool. I brought to mediation what I bring to audits, dates, receipts, behavior patterns, and an absence of adjectives. I included the therapist's recommendation that Logan remain in a neutral environment until he reports feeling safe. I included the sublet address and the times Logan had texted me asking to be picked up from places where he used to walk home. I did not include the 3 adjectives that froth at the top of your throat when a person you loved forgets how to be careful with your child. Adjectives are for kitchens. Mediation is a ledger. The mediator appreciated the ledger. He wrote a temporary plan that emphasized sleep, school, therapy, and a prohibition on overnight visitors unrelated by blood. He did not write the word river. He didn't have to. Tessa's lawyer said the plan was patriarchal. The mediator said the plan was pediatric. Tessa glared. She signed. The pen left a groove in the paper that made me feel like the document had teeth. Logan went to therapy twice in a week and said almost nothing to the therapist for 40 minutes each time. The third time, he said 2 sentences that mattered. He said, I don't want to live in a house where adults make me pick teams. He said, I want mom to be okay somewhere I don't have to be. The therapist sent us home with homework that involved talking about math and movies and none of the things we thought we had come to the table to discuss. When Logan asked if he could get his permit this summer, I told him yes and meant it like a plan for a road out. Tessa tried to get me to fight. She posted a long note on Instagram about narcissistic abuse that used the word custody 3 times without mentioning a child. Her friends told her to burn it down. She wrote back fire emojis. I turned my phone over and let the notifications die in the dark like mosquitoes. When she asked to speak to Logan on speaker, I put the phone on the table between us and let him watch me not react. He said hi. She said I love you. He said me too. She said me too. She said you're safe with dad. He said you're safe with dad. She began to cry and I turned down the volume. not to be cruel, but so he could hear his own breath. 2 Fridays later, I drove Logan to school, and he asked if he could go to his friend Jonah's after. I said yes if you send me a photo of 2 faces and a dog. He rolled his eyes at the dog part, then sent me the photo with a muttered fine. He fell asleep early that night, an event so rare I took a picture of his door, the way light pooled under it, like the house had a heartbeat. River texted me from a number I didn't know. He said we should meet as men and talk about love. I wrote back, we can meet as adults and talk about boundaries. He said I am not the enemy. I wrote, you are a man who kissed a client on a sidewalk where her teenage son could see you. Whatever else you are, put it next to that. He wrote nothing after that. Sometimes the sentence is a wall that doesn't need your help. The foundation of the temporary plan hardened into a co-parenting schedule that worked because it prioritized school, sleep, and therapy. We split holidays with an eye toward logistics, not sentiment. Thanksgiving with my mother because her stuffing is the only stuffing Logan eats. Christmas morning with Tessa because I never liked the performance of wonder. His birthday with both of us in a public place with other teenagers present because teenagers are natural diffusers. We chose a pizza place where the tables wobble and the soda machine always has one flavor nobody asked for. We sang too loud. Logan wore the tolerance of a boy who knows his parents are doing their best with a chore they didn't want. There were quiet wins. Logan got his permit. He drove to the store with me, clutching the door handle and pretending not to. He went back to the pantry and helped Mr. Alvarez stack apples without turning them into bruises. He texted me a photo of his homework, and I texted back a photo of mine, a stack of returns with sticky notes like small flags. He sent a photo of a cat asleep on his math book. I sent a photo of the plant on my sublet windowsill, pretending to be healthy. None of these are proof of anything grand. They are receipts that add up to something like a life. Tessa stopped posting about riverworm healing. She pivoted to posts about rebirth that featured candles and bowls. Then she pivoted to hikes in Sauvie Island and smoothies in cups that promise your body is a project you can manage with spinach. Everett didn't appear because there was no Everett in this story. River stopped appearing after a week when a commenter with a burner account posted a single sentence and 2 clapping hands. A sidewalk is a mirror. People see more than you want them to. Tessa's page went quiet for 10 days. When it returned, it was photos of Logan's shoes and my hands setting a board game on a table we didn't have to share. Mediation ended with a set of papers, the court stamped with the same low glamour they stamp everything. The judge didn't care that my handwriting is neater than most men's. He cared that we had made a plan that did not bleed. He signed it. We left without seeing each other in the hallway because our mediator understands that privacy is a gift you give a future you will still have to eat dinner near. On a Sunday that felt like it might not drown, I went back to the Mutual Aid Center alone. I filled bags and listened to Mrs. Nunez tell me her back was a traitor with a sense of humor. I watched a new volunteer break down a box wrong and taught him the trick with 2 quick cuts. I took home a sack of onions because the head volunteer insists on sending staff home heavy. I made sauce. I sat at a table with 2 plates and invited my son to eat. We ate without naming the person not there and talked about the Blazers like they might decide to be kind to us. You could argue I should have blown it up. You could argue I owed the internet an essay about healing that hurts. You could argue River deserved his name on a wall. I decided instead to be boring and meticulous in a way that looks like cowardice from the cheap seats. I moved our son's bed first. I moved his toothbrush. I moved the documents that let him register for school without putting his head back underwater. I wrote down recommendations from the therapist and stapled them to my fear so my fear would behave. I showed up to mediation with papers and not performance. I refused to make Logan a prop in a play about 2 adults who wanted the last word. That's the quiet heroism my parents taught me when they dragged folding chairs and swept gym floors and went home without a photo. Months later, at a farmer's market with strawberries pretending to be candy, I saw Tessa. She had a canvas bag and a new haircut that made her look like the woman I met, but edited. She stopped near the tomatoes. We said hello like people who have finally put a floor under their feet. She said, "Thank you for not torturing me online." I said, "Thank you for signing the papers." She said, "Is Logan happy?" I said, "He sleeps." She nodded in the way you nod when you've been told you are forgiven for something you'll never stop wishing you hadn't done. We parted with groceries and kept our dignity in our hands like a fragile bowl you pass across a table and don't drop. If there is a lesson I trust in this mess, it's this. You can call your betrayal a narrative, a healing arc, a somatic awakening. You can wrap it in theory and tape it with words that make people clap. but a teenager's face is a mirror you can't blur. The test wasn't whether Tessa attended my family's Sunday. The test was whether she told the truth when it mattered, showed up when she said she would, and carried something heavy when someone smaller than her needed it. She failed 2 out of 3 and then tried to grade me for noticing. I didn't pass because I am noble. I passed because I picked up our son and left quietly. I still keep a list on the fridge in the place I pay rent for. Coffee, milk, onions, patience, compassion, boundaries, a line about calling my mother and listening for at least 7 minutes before talking about myself, a line about the DMV and how you can survive it if you eat before you go, a line about not checking Instagram past 10. Some nights I add the words no more sessions and then cross them out because I don't want to write rules that shrink my life. I want rules that keep him fed and me kind. People ask me what happened. I say we didn't agree on where honesty starts. If they push, I say our son saw what I hoped he wouldn't. If they won't let it go, I tell the truth. She wore Instagram feminism like armor, and behind it was a door she propped open for a man who charges cash. I didn't smash the door of my ego, I carried my kid through another one. Would you have gone public? Would it have felt good to make the city pick sides? Or would you have done what I did, filed papers, listened to a therapist, and put your boy to bed in a place where the only stories were the ones he wanted to hear? Drop your thoughts below. If this story hit, please like the video, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that protecting a child is louder than any post.